Go.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie Maxwell,
And I'm Chase Moulter.
and our topic is on conflict. And the two types that I picked were workplace and in relationships. What comes to your mind when you think of the word conflict? Most people envision anger, harsh words, threat, hurt feelings, damaged relationships. But when you think about it, not all of conflict can be bad. Conflict is a common occurrence in the workplace and in relationships, but there are steps one can take to manage conflict. I've done research on the topic of conflict in the workplace and in relationships by using journals, books, and statistical analysis, and have also spoken with several individuals. Today, I will first discuss with you the types of conflict, ways people manage conflict, and the most effective way to deal with conflict. In order to manage conflict, you first have to know the types of conflict. One type of conflict is pseudo-conflict. It is a situation where the conflict is not presently evident, but you could easily emerge. Another type of conflict is value conflict. Value conflict is a contrasting values or beliefs. Say that Nick wants to work on a special project on Sunday, but his wife doesn't agree with it because they have to go to church. The third type of conflict is content conflict. This type of conflict is usually the result of one party's misinformation. And the final conflict is an ego conflict. An ego conflict is a conflict over a win-lose situation in which one person's perspective is a measure of who they are, what they are, what component they are, and whom they have the power over. Now that I have discussed the types of conflict, let me discuss my second main point, which is ways people manage conflict. People often use avoidance as a method of resolving conflict. This method is often used in the workplace and in relationships because it is often the easiest to do. At first, conflict avoidance might sound like a good thing after all. So many of us naturally avoid conflict in one way or another, but there is a difference between creating a healthy environment where conflict is rare and avoiding conflict when it presents itself. Just about everyone who knows how to assume these three roles, and most of us have a favorite one. One of them would be the persecutor. A person assuming this role will use aggressive behavior towards another person, attacking the intended victim, and the attack can be physical or verbal. Another one would be the victim. People who assume the victim role use non-assertive behavior to invite others to see them as not okay. People often stepped into the victim role because they are feeling stressed or have low self-esteem. And the last one is the rescuer. Those who take on this role either have a non-assertive or aggressive behavior. Some people become rescuers because they won't say no and reluctantly take on the responsibility of trying to solve the victim's player's problems. And lastly, I'll explain the most effective way to deal with conflict. There are many steps on how to deal with conflict. Awareness is the best tool you can have. Should look out for the main warning signs like people feeling depressed, having anxiety, weight gain, and there are levels of conflict which can help determine which way the situation is going. To prevent such conflicts from occurring, use only assertive behavior. Assertive behavior is defined as being honest, appropriate, respectful, and direct. As most people already are assertive a great deal of the time, the challenge is being assertive at those times when most tempted to become aggressive or non-assertive. Some communication aspects would be to use I statements instead of you statements, eliminate words like maybe, kind of, sort of, avoid exaggerations and negative judgments, and use polite commands or when directing a request. The bottom line is that conflict does not occur everywhere you go, but there are effective steps on how to handle it and move on. In conclusion, conflict of all kinds is evident in every situation at some point today. Now that we know what it is, what kinds there are, and ways to cope, we can begin a more Peaceable life. Remember, if at all possible, compromise is the best route if both parties are willing to work towards that goal. One needs to listen, ask questions, and to look at all possible solutions. Yeah.
All right. So with 2020 coming to a close, it's pretty evident that this year is completely full of conflict. With Black Lives Matter protests, from anti-maskers to the presidential election, all these things have caused massive conflict in the U.S. It seems, and with all this conflict around, it can cause our worldview to change to where it seems like the ratio of conflict is all the way up here compared to everything else, which can have the effect of causing us to believe that two opposing groups will eventually always lead to conflict, which isn't true. Conflict can be avoided. And while conflict is extremely detrimental to the people it involves, conflict on a small scale and on a large scale can be avoided. It can be avoided, right? So I've been researching conflict between groups specifically for the past week. And for what I'm about to go into, I've lived with my homosexual mother for my entire life. And she's told me many stories about conflicts that she had when she was a kid. And the most common, or at least a very common kind of conflict, is bullying of LGBTQ students in school. It's no surprise that LGBTQ students are bullied more than other students because bullying is a power dynamic where the bully sees himself as superior because the receiver is different. So then it makes it so much harder for the receiver to fight back because it looks like the bully is on so much of a higher plane than the receiver. And what this causes is a great fear in these students. The fear is so great that 30% of these students miss school, and over half of them don't go to any extracurricular activities just because they're afraid of going into conflict with these bullies. The bullying isn't even happening, and they're already being robbed of a safe space that is the classroom. And then when bullying does happen, 70% of the time it is verbal, but a third of the time it's physical, which obviously has a very detrimental attack on the people involved. They have a lower GPA, they have lower grades, they don't come to schools often, and they have higher rates of depression and lower self-esteem. And these things don't just go away; they can persist for years and years, until adulthood. And the sad part is that this conflict could have been avoided. It's not like bullying is a thing that has to happen. Bullying is a voluntary action that someone has to take. And schools are implementing things now and it's causing bullying to go down, which further proves that it could have been avoided in the first place. Bullying isn't a thing that has to happen. So on the small scale, conflict can be avoided. And now we can bring it onto the large scale of conflict between ethnic groups. And the immediate assumption is that ethnic groups will eventually lead to violence if they don't like each other enough, because it's assumed that if you're in one group, you develop bonds with that group, and then simultaneously you develop a hatred for the other group. And this simply isn't true. What is more likely is that it's simply easier to work with people who are in your ethnic group because they share your language and they share your social network. And even if there is no perceived benefit of working with them, you're still more likely to work with them because to you, it looks like they are more likely to discriminate in favor of you, which means that you would probably do the same thing. In the second article they did some experiments. Sorry. The first one was they tried to see if people would donate less or more to ethnic groups that weren't their own. And there wasn't any discrepancies. They donated the same amount to all the ethnic groups. And in the second experiment, they had partners of people in the same ethnic group and people in opposing ethnic groups. And they tried to see how well they could do tasks or solve problems. And what they found is that the people in opposing ethnic groups didn't have any detriment when compared to the people in the same ethnic group. They all were able to complete the problems as equally as everyone else. The only time when their behavior did change was when they were explicitly told that their co-ethnics were going to watch and see their actions. So they had anonymity and they were completely fine with working with people of the opposite ethnic group. And then once this anonymity is taken away, only then do they have a problem with it. Only then do they think, hey, I should be over there with that guy. And what this proves is that this conflict between ethnic groups isn't stemming from hatred or antipathy. It stems from reciprocity, meaning that I see the person of my ethnic group and I believe that they are going to discriminate in favor of me. So therefore, I am going to discriminate in favor of them, therefore choosing them in more things and more things. And then it's like a mob mentality at that point, to where now we have to hate the other group because we are this group. And that isn't how it has to be, because it's a misunderstanding, right? These people think that they hate each other, but in actuality, their conflict is caused by reciprocity. So it could be avoided too. They just have to understand more. It's not like if they understood more, then it would be way more likely that these conflicts would be resolved without violence. There would probably be less of them, maybe not even at all. And so that's conflict on a small scale in schools, and then conflict on a larger scale between ethnic groups. And in this presentation, I have shown that conflict can have major repercussions or major detriment to the people that are involved for years to come. And how conflict doesn't always have to happen. Conflict can be avoided. And I hope that when you look at this, you can try to avoid as much conflict in your future. And if you do get into conflict in your future, you need to recognize that what happens in that conflict can affect the people for years and years to come, even if it doesn't seem like it can. With the rise of the social media, it seems like conflict is everywhere now. It seems like a whole life is being consumed by conflict. But this simply isn't a thing. And everyone should be able to do their part to lower the conflict in order to bring less fear into people's lives. And yeah.